China's overseas auto sales surged to a record last year, on track, in fact, to surpass Japan as the world's biggest exporter. While China is the world leader in EVs, it was the traditional gas cars, in fact, that were the main driver, with high demand also from Russia. According to the China Passenger Car Association, roughly 5.26 million Chinese-made cars were sold overseas. And for more about the rise of the Chinese car industry, Dan McClory joins us, Managing Director and Head of China for Boustead Securities. Good to see you again. I hope your New Year's off to a good start. It is apparently for China's car industry, but here's the thing. We knew this day was going to come. China simply has a very robust auto industry, and they've been trying to go overseas for almost a decade, and they're finally getting traction.
Yeah, absolutely. You knew this day was coming. I'm telling you, when I was growing up in Detroit, we never thought we'd see the day of Japan, let alone China, assuming this position. So I think it's quite a watershed event. And I think the world is watching to see the sustainability of it, the increase, the move into higher margin vehicles, electric vehicles, everything else. So there's a lot in front of China. This is really a record-breaking statistic.
What makes these manufacturers in China much more competitive than, say, their Japanese or Korean or American counterparts? And I'm leaving a lot of countries out, but you know why I'm asking this.
Well, overcapacity is one reason, okay? Let's face it, there's about 10 million units of overcapacity in China right now. So, you know, exporting 5 of them, that's just sort of, I don't want to say in the normal course. So there's definitely sufficient capacity for China to be making this move. Other countries can't say that. They've been in austerity programs, they've been in cutbacks, they've been in marginalizations of some of their automotive industries. China's been the opposite.
Does it come down to cost? Because a lot of experts would say, well, look, if it's costing you $2,000 to build the exact same vehicle, it might cost $1,000 to build it elsewhere. Of course, there's going to be an advantage.
Cost is part of it. But I think being able to have a supply chain that allows you to access certain part of the world relatively quickly, as China has, is a real advantage. And I think you know what I'm talking about here, Phil. You know, geopolitical situation in the U.S. has said that's not really a big market. Looking at Europe, they've looked at some obstructionist type legislation as well, or protectionist legislation from their point of view. But China has had the ability to pivot into places like you mentioned, Russia being one. Other parts of Southeast Asia, for example, Thailand is a market. So I think China's been a little bit right place, right time, and able to move that production into markets that others have either overlooked or have decided to focus on different markets.
And maybe I ask, the Japanese automakers have had a very big presence in places such as Thailand, for example, Korea as well. Why haven't they, I guess, taken advantage of this trend?
You know, as mentioned earlier, the automotive industry in China is growing. And I think when you have a domestic industry that is breaking into its stride, think of the U.S. in the 1960s or even the 50s, you have momentum. Okay, so you're moving from a position of strength, again, as opposed to a position from perhaps austerity or even retrenchment. So I think the mindset is one to be more nimble, more entrepreneurial, more guerrilla-like in approaching some of these foreign markets.
And this is exactly, you know, part of China's playbook, right? They want to move up in the manufacturing sort of structure and move up in the exporting structure of bringing things that are more value added. I don't know about margins, but at least of higher quality to the international marketplace, because ultimately it's good for the companies, and I'm sure it's good for the PR for China. Completely.
Remember, 5% of that 5 million export figure is from Tesla building their cars in China.
Right. I was going to say, you know, here the U.S. automakers all trying to go into China to make a buck. And at the same time, the Chinese automakers are going elsewhere to make a buck. But I suppose we're not telling the full story, because they're probably making money on both sides of the coin, and at the same time learning some of the best practices of other international factories, putting those in play, and then kind of using it as a competitive advantage. What could go wrong here for China's auto industry? I know they've got the positive momentum going in the right direction.
Yeah, I made some criticisms of other more developed automotive markets perhaps being in rationalization or retrenchment or austerity. So if the domestic market does not continue to grow in China, if it flatlines, then China's going to have to look seriously, China's auto manufacturers, about similar rationalization. So dialing back production, which then would put them more in a position of perhaps not exporting as freely as possible because they can do it at this point with some rationalized cost. I mean, they may have to be much more cost conscious about what they're sending outside of China. So I think let's keep an eye on the domestic industry as a harbinger of China's ability to keep moving externally. So that's one for sure. You know, protectionist legislation. You know, it's definitely the case in the U.S.
Dan, I got a few seconds left. When might we see some of these vehicles here in the U.S. and I mean, there's always a safety question that probably has to be to go through a lengthy approval process as well, I'm guessing.
My easiest answer is when China sets up shop in the U.S. and starts building things like some of the Europeans did. A purely export-driven market, it's going to take time because of those geopolitical things that you and I and these manufacturers really don't have any influence over.
Dan, good to see you. I see some sunny weather there in the background. I'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil.